Okay, so we're going to get started with our third session, meaningful experiences and preference signaling. Dr. Eiger, Dr. Godfrey, do you want to take it away?
Sure. So hello again. Dr. Eiger and I are going to talk to you about the new format for ERAS with some of the changes that have happened this year as they've combined the supplemental and main application together. And we'll go into detail about how to signal your preferences. The next slide.
Just Dr. Godfrey, in case those people are just joining us now, do you want to reintroduce yourself real quick?
Oh, sure.
Dr. Eiger, that'd be great.
So in case you are tuning in late, I am Sarah Godfrey, and I did medical school, my MPH and residency at Columbia, and now I am at UT Southwestern for my cardiology and palliative care fellowships. And Dr. Eiger?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Dylan Eiger. I did my undergraduate and then MD, PhD at Duke University, and now I'm up at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School completing my residency in internal medicine.
Wonderful. So getting into the nitty-gritty of how to fill out ERAS. So starting this year, you are limited to only include 10 experiences into that section. Previously, you could list as many things as you wanted to. So now you really want to think about what are the 10 most important things that you want to include. And the format is a little bit different. Now for each experience, you're still going to include a short description of what your role was in that experience. But you also have to list what the setting was, as well as a primary focus area, which is things like volunteering, public health, advocacy. There's a whole drop-down list that you pick from. And you also pick a key characteristic that highlights about you in that position. And again, there's a drop-down list. It includes things like teamwork, leadership skills, different aspects that you want to highlight about yourself. So as you're trying to prioritize what 10 things to include, you may want to include a mix to show, that you're a well-rounded person and have some research experiences, have some volunteer work, have some teaching or mentoring experiences as well to show multiple areas of your application. And to sort of maximize your application, as was mentioned in the last session, you may want to choose experiences that you are not going to talk about in your personal statement, at least for not all of them. That way you can include more in your application if you cover some things in your personal statement and some in your experiences section. And as you go through and describe the experience, what you really want to put in there with your basically 1,000 characters is specifically what your role was. Because you can list a research project and it's possible that really all you were responsible for was submitting the article for publication. If you were really active in a research project, you recruited the patients, you did the analysis, you did the basic science, you want to be very explicit about what you did in each project or each experience that you include. And also give a sense of how long you were doing it. Was this a one-time volunteer event, or is this something that you've been doing every Saturday for 4 years? So give a sense about how much time commitment it has been for you as well. Dr. Eiger, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think I completely agree with you. The one thing that I want to highlight is what you said in that last bullet point. When you are really limited in terms of characters that you can actually write. So I think you want to highlight exactly what you did. So the context, the roles, and responsibility. When you're writing your personal statement, that is your opportunity to be a little bit more, let's say, creative with what story you're trying to convey. In this section, you want to be concrete. You want to say, this is what this experience was, and this is what I did, and this is what I got out of it. If it's like a publication or a poster and abstract, you do not need to be creative here. It can be nice and short and sweet. And if it feels uncomfortable, know that that's the norm, is that you want it to be direct and to just convey what you accomplished. That's it.
Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so of those experiences, of the 10 that you've listed, 3 of them, you can get an additional 300 characters to explain why they were the most meaningful for you. So this is where you can use that extra 300 characters to describe what you learned, how this influenced you on your journey, more of a description of the experience's impact on you, as opposed to the other ones where you're really just listing in CV format what you did. And for here, you want to think about what those are. Both, they should be genuinely things that were really meaningful to you and that you can make a good argument for why this has impacted you in your journey to medicine. But also you may want to, again, have kind of a diverse section or diverse choices for those. Maybe you want to pick one research experience, one volunteer, one, athletic. If you are someone who runs triathlons, that could be one of your most meaningful experiences. They don't all have to be traditional, research experiences for medical school. And we can go on to the next slide from there.
So there is another section that we want to highlight is not necessary, where you can talk about an impactful experience that you had. And this is generally thought of as something that's a hardship or a challenge. So some of the more common things that students will write about include family background, talking about any personal struggles or socioeconomic struggles that you have had while growing up. Anything interesting about your educational experience that may be different than the majority of students applying. As I mentioned, financial difficulties or impactful experiences. Something regarding the community setting that you either were brought up in or a place where you trained or where you currently work, and anything else. Now, I want to highlight that this is not a required question, and students will often ask me, Dylan, should I write something, even if I don't have a really impactful experience to talk about? And I personally think that the answer is no, you should not write something. I'll be transparent. I did not write anything for this section because I don't think I really had a life experience which warranted more explanation beyond what I've already included in my application. So I think whenever you're approaching this section, know that if you do not write something, it will not hurt you. But sometimes writing something that isn't that impactful can seem a little odd. I don't think this is the place where you write about not passing a board exam and how difficult that was. I think that's something that's better suited for the personal statement, because this is really meant for personal struggles or personal experiences that you have had which have impacted your trajectory in medicine. Do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with everything you just said. I think this is one where you want to think carefully about whether or not this applies to you. For a lot of people, this does not. And so I would not try to force an experience or try to come up with something. If this doesn't immediately resonate with you, I would leave this section blank.
Great. So kind of as we've alluded to before, there's no supplemental application to ERAS this year. For any of you who applied last year, you are familiar with the fact that there was a complete separate website that you had to go to fill out the supplemental application. That no longer exists. However, components of that supplemental application have now been integrated into the main residency application on ERAS. And that's what we're going to talk about next, are some of those components. So if we can head to the next slide, we'll dive into that.
Okay, so now we're going to talk through that combined part that used to be part of the supplemental application, as Dr. Eiger said. So the first part is your geographic preferences. We've included this map here that ERAS has divided the country into 12 divisions. And you can select up to 3 of them that you are going to give preference to. If you do that, if you choose, New England, Mid-Atlantic, and South Atlantic, then the programs from those regions will see that you have prioritized them and can see your 300 character description of why. You have family there, you have a partner with a job there, things to that nature. If you choose not to and say you have no preference, you also get 300 characters to say why you have no preference, that you are open to learning anywhere and to going to a program anywhere in the country. I would say to be careful about using this unless you really have a geographic preference need. Like, you cannot move out of the East Coast because of whatever reason. Because if you choose 3 that you preference, other programs in other regions will realize that you did not list their region, if that makes sense. So you don't want to have programs in the West Coast think that you're not as interested because you signaled 3 other regions. Another thing you can list now is you can list hometowns, up to 5 places you have lived, to show that you have a connection to different areas of the country if it's not already obvious from your application. And the last one is similar. Do you have an urban versus rural preference? You can use 300 characters to describe it. All programs will see this. Or you can say no preference and you still get 300 characters to say why you have no preference. Once again, I think unless you have extremely strong preferences for certain reasons, no preference is probably the best way to go so that you don't kind of put down programs that might be from the opposite category. Do you have any other thoughts, Dr. Eiger?
No, I think that was spot on. I would definitely agree with you that unless you have a really strong preference for a particular area, normally that's because people have family there or their significant other is there. I think it's safe if you truly have no preference to write no preference, because once you say no preference, every program will see that. Whereas if you select, let's say, Pacific, Mountain, and West North Central, only those 3 areas will see that you preference their geographic location, and then all of the other programs that are not within those 3 will not see anything. Does that matter? Maybe not, but they may say, hey, we don't see anything written here for the student regarding geographic preference, so either 1, they didn't fill it out, or 2, they don't want to come here. So it may be leaving them with more questions than answers. So I think if you truly have no preference, I think it's to your advantage to write no preference. But if you are diehard, I need to be in California, then I think it makes sense to then go ahead and list California, the Pacific region, as one of your preferences.
And to that point, I would also think that certain regions are going to be very, very popular. So if you are only listing New York, California, and New England, you're going to be with a lot of people who are picking those. So I don't know that it gives you any boost if you're picking an extremely popular region, as opposed to if you have a connection to the Midwest, maybe that does give you some benefit there. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so program signals. Someone asked about this in the Q&A earlier. So what a program signal is basically a way to tell a small number of programs, it depends on your specialty, that you are very interested in learning more about them. Now, again, this is in ERAS, so you haven't interviewed there yet. You're not committing to anything, but it can tell programs that you've researched them, that you have a connection there, that you are just very interested in learning more about them and interviewing with them. And depending on what specialty you're applying to will determine how many you get, as well as the type. The type part is new this year. This year, some specialties are doing kind of gold and silver signals where you can have a top tier and a middle tier of programs to apply to. We can head on to the next slide. So here is the list by your specialty of what you can do. So if you're applying in internal medicine, you just get 7 signals, not any specific color or tier, but you can pick 7 programs that you are very interested in to signal. But if you're someone applying into dermatology, you get 3 gold and 25 silver signals. So there are 3 programs that you are absolutely in love with and really want to know more about. And then 25 that is kind of your second tier of programs. Now, on how to figure out which ones to signal, this is a very personalized decision, and something you may want to talk about with advisors and mentors at your school. But I would say general advice is, unless you are an all-star applicant, I would not use your signals for like the top 5 programs in the country, because lots of people are going to signal those programs and it may not have the weight that it would if you signal to a less competitive program that you may have a better shot of getting into, and you have a connection there, or they have a specific track in the residency that you're really interested in. It gives it more weight when it goes to that sort of a program. You may also want to consider geography here. If you have spent your entire life, like me, in the Northeast, and suddenly you're in love with a program in the South, signaling to them may be a good way to say, like, hey, I'm really interested in moving, even though my application doesn't necessarily show you that I've moved before. What other thoughts do you have, Dr. Eiger?
So I think this is a very difficult subject for a lot of students. And truthfully, there's no data, to my knowledge, on how to optimize your chance for this. And I know we have a question that does have a video reference from AAMC, which we'll talk about. But I agree with your approach. If you are, there's no reason to signal the top 5 to 10 programs in that specialty, because everyone's going to be doing it. And honestly, most of them don't even look at it. What I think is more helpful is what you mentioned. You know, if there's a program that is very much within reach based off of your credentials that isn't the top program in the country, but you could totally, you think you have a good shot there and you could very much see yourself going there and being happy, that is the ideal school to shoot for. I think it's really important that you take the time to look onto these program websites to make sure you read how they use program signaling. And the reason I mention that is because when I applied last year, I signaled a program that was, their name was available to signal, but then I went and read their website and they said, we don't use signaling. Okay, so I think about the types and caliber of program that you want to signal, and then go and actually look on their program website to see if there's any information about how they use signaling, because that may then influence if that program is going to be a signal, if it's going to be a gold, or if it's going to be a silver, or you may not even signal them at all. So it's a very personalized decision, and I think Dr. Godfrey's point about speaking with mentors and getting their insight is going to be very valuable, since this is very new territory for all of us.
And the programs are figuring it out themselves. Honestly, program directors, this is all a new system. No one really knows what it means. So it's going to be kind of taking the best advice you can get from multiple sources and trying to pick from there. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, with that, that is kind of an overview of how to fill out the ERAS experiences section and preferences and signaling. Please feel free. I know people have been putting lots of questions in the chat, and we can answer some of those now before we move on to the next section.
Yeah, I can read some of them off for you, Dr. Godfrey, and I can chime in on some of them too.
Perfect.
One that came up was a link to a video just talking about how the video says that there's every incentive to preference a region, a geographic reason, rather than no preference. So again, this is all very new, and I think you could have a lot of different perspectives on this subject. My personal opinion is that it depends on the caliber of applicant you are. If you are a star-studded applicant and you are going to match well, I don't really think it matters that much where you put down your geographic preference, because these programs are going to see you, they're going to see that you're good. And if you actually have no preference, they're going to be like, well, this person's good, we're going to try and get them. If you are not, the top caliber applicant and your goal is simply to match, and you want to get matched to an internal medicine residency program, then I could very much see a benefit to picking a geographic region. And Dr. Godfrey actually alluded to this. So there are some areas in the United States which are much more heavily desired than others. And those tend to be the East and the West Coast. But if you say, hey, again, my goal is to be an internal medicine doc, and I could see myself practicing in the Midwest, putting that you're interested in the Midwest could very much help you, because they know, hey, this person is very much willing to come here. We're going to give them an interview because we know the Midwest doesn't attract that many applicants like the coast. And since they've shown interest, we're definitely going to interview them. So again, I wish I had the data to support anything I'm saying or anything the AAMC is saying, but the unfortunate reality of the situation is that this is all so new that we're all kind of conjecturing about what we think program directors or how program directors will respond. Dr. Godfrey, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that is a good summary. That as ERAS continues to change the application, applicants and program directors are figuring out how to interpret all these changes.
One question I'll post to you that was asked, and it's a good question, one that we get asked often, is should we signal a program that we did an away rotation at? And you can also say, should we signal our home institution, or is it assumed that we're already interested and we shouldn't signal them? What do you think?
So up until this year, you weren't actually allowed to signal programs that you did a sub-I at or your home program. I think in general, and maybe you'll disagree with me on this, programs where you have traveled to them and done a rotation are aware that you're very interested. So I don't know that you necessarily need to signal them, because you have signaled them by traveling and spending a month with them. I would, in most circumstances, counsel people to use your signals for programs that you have not done a rotation at. Would you agree or disagree?
I completely agree. I think these programs know that if you trained there or visited there, you're interested. So they're not going to see a lack of a signal as an indication that you're not interested. Most of the time, programs are active and say, do not signal us if you worked here, because we know that already. And if you do want to express further interest, you can actually write that in a personal statement directed to them specifically, right? So you can, again, as we mentioned, you can make multiple different personal statements, and you can say, I trained at Duke and I did my sub-I or an away rotation there. I'm not going to signal you, but in my personal statement, I'm going to add 3 sentences about how I loved my away rotation there and how much I loved the program. So I would advise to not preference or signal any program you either attended or trained at.
If I may, I want to add a tidbit that's a little bit specialty specific, and we can delve into this a little bit more on the wide Q&A. But I think my take on signaling, having talked to our program director, at least in orthopedic surgery, is that the use of signaling is very specific to each specialty. And so whatever specialty you ultimately are applying to, it would behoove you to talk to faculty who may sit on the admissions committee, at your home institution, to get some better advice from them as well, pertinent to specific specialties. Because I know that for orthopedic surgery, you are allowed 30 signals. And so the reality with highly competitive surgical subspecialties is that We are always trying to figure out a way to decrease the number of applications that we have to review. And while that's not very fair, it's ultimately kind of all part of this process that's moving to try to diminish the robust submission of applications across the country to every single program, because it inundates programs with so many applications that you can't sift through the people that are really interested in your program. And so that, I think, is kind of the ultimate reason that signaling was developed. And for orthopedics, I can't say for sure that if you don't signal a program, your application won't be looked at as closely for an interview. But if you did an away rotation at a program, at least for orthopedics, I would probably still recommend, if you enjoyed your rotation there and that's actually a program that you would want to attend, not just one that you want to get an interview at, that you do signal that program, because that will change the way that your application shows up on people's desks. And again, I think that's a little bit specific to surgical subspecialties that are highly competitive. And obviously, when you have a ton of signals, I think orthopedics has the largest number of signals available to you, then you're obviously using them a little bit differently than you do in other specialties. So for what that's worth, but we can talk about that more in the Q&A too.
Great. With that, we're going to pause the recording on this session, and then we're going to jump right into the open Q&A.